Evelyn Harper hit the saloon floor before she even understood what had happened. The sound her ribs made against the hardwood was the kind of sound that silenced a room not out of horror, but out of habit. These men had heard it before. They looked down at their drinks. They looked at the wall. They looked anywhere but at her. And Sheriff Harmon Delk straightened his coat, rolled his shoulders, and said, "Next time you come into my town asking questions, ma'am, I won't be so gentle. If you're watching this right now, I want you to stay with me until the very end, because what happens to Evelyn Harper in Cutter's Bend, Colorado, is not just a story about injustice. It is a story about what one woman refuses to let go of, even when the whole world tells her to." Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. This channel is built for people who believe that justice, even when it comes late, still comes. The stage rolled into Cutter's Bend just after noon, and nobody on the street looked up. That was the first thing Evelyn noticed. In every other town she had passed through on the long ride west from Denver, people watched the stage come in. Children ran alongside. Old men tipped their hats from porch chairs. But here, the people of Cutter's Bend kept their eyes down their shoulders forward, their feet moving fast and deliberate like folks who had learned that curiosity was a thing that cost you. Evelyn stepped down from the stage with a leather satchel over one arm and a carpet bag in her other hand. She was 31 years old, dark-haired, and wearing a dress the color of charcoal that had been mended twice at the left sleeve. She had not bought anything new since Daniel died. She did not intend to until this was finished. She stood in the dust of the main street and read the town the way Daniel had taught her to read a surveyor's map from the edges inward, looking for what didn't fit. The land office sat at the far end between a feed store and what appeared to be a closed-down telegraph office. The sheriff's building was 3 lots up on the right American flag, hanging limp in the dead afternoon air. The Rusty Spur Saloon occupied the biggest building on the block, 2 stories wide windows, and a painted sign that had once been red and was now the color of old blood. She had 3 days of money left. She had one name. And she had the kind of resolve that only comes to women who have already lost everything once and decided they would not lose again. The land office was locked. A hand-lettered sign read, "Closed back Thursday." It was Tuesday. Evelyn stood in front of that sign for a long moment. Then she turned and walked toward the Rusty Spur. The saloon was not full, but it was occupied. 8 men at the bar, maybe a dozen more at tables. A piano player working through something slow and tuneless in the corner. The bartender, a heavy-set man with forearms like fence posts, watched her walk in with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite welcome. She stopped 3 feet inside the door and spoke clearly. "I need to speak with the sheriff." The piano stopped. Not because anyone told it to. The player just seemed to run out of notes. "Sheriff ain't here," the bartender said. "Can you tell me where I might find him?" "Can't say." "Can't or won't." The bartender's jaw tightened. Nobody at the bar turned around. That was the thing that unsettled her most, not the silence itself, but the quality of it. It was practiced. It was a silence these men had performed before. "You looking for trouble, miss?" one of the barmen said without turning his head. "I'm looking for the sheriff," Evelyn said. "My name is Evelyn Harper. My husband was Daniel Harper. He was a surveyor who worked this region in the spring of 1880. He registered a silver claim with the Territorial Land Office before he died, and I have reason to believe the records of that claim have been lady." The voice came from the back of the room. Evelyn turned. She had not heard the door behind the bar open. She had not heard the boots on the floor. But he was there now, tall, thick through the chest, wearing a lawman's star on a coat that was too fine for a county sheriff in a broke-down Colorado mining town. He had a square jaw and pale blue eyes, and the particular stillness of a man who had never once in his life been afraid of what he was about to do. Sheriff Harmon Delk. She knew the face. She had found a newspaper photograph 3 months ago, tucked inside a letter Daniel had sent her that she hadn't opened until after the funeral. In the margin beside the photograph in Daniel's careful handwriting were 2 words, "He knows." "You're interrupting my afternoon," Delk said. "I apologize for that," Evelyn said. "I only want a few minutes of your time. My husband." "I heard what you said." "Then you know why I'm here." Delk walked toward her slowly, his hands loose at his sides, and Evelyn held her ground, even though every instinct in her body was registering the particular danger of a man who moved like that, unhurried, certain performing calm for an audience. "Daniel Harper," Delk said. "Yes." "Surveyor." "Yes." "Dead." "Yes," she said, and her voice did not waver. "And before he died, he filed a mining claim on a silver deposit near the base of Cutter's Ridge. That claim was registered. I have a copy of the original filing. What I don't have is the land office confirmation, because when I wrote to request it, I was told the record doesn't exist. I believe it does exist. I believe it's here, and I believe—" He hit her. Not with his fist. He didn't use his fist. He used the flat of his boot kicked sideways into her midsection while she was still talking, and the air left her body before she understood what her body was doing, which was falling, satchel, swinging wide carpetbag, dropping Evelyn Harper, going down onto the floor of the Rusty Spur Saloon in front of every man in that room. She hit the hardwood on her left side. Her ribs screamed. She felt something give a deep cracking pressure, and for 3 full seconds, the world reduced itself to the grain of the floorboards and the taste of blood, where she had bitten the inside of her cheek, and the sound of Delk's boots as he stepped around her slowly, like she was a piece of furniture he was considering where to put. Nobody moved. Not one man in that saloon stood up. Evelyn lay on the floor and breathed through the pain and looked up at Harmon Delk's badge, and she thought Daniel saw this. Daniel knew what this man was. And Daniel is dead. "Next time you come into my town asking questions, ma'am," Delk said, his voice perfectly level, "I won't be so gentle." He walked back through the door behind the bar. It swung shut. The piano started again. Oh. Evelyn pushed herself up. Her left hand found the bar rail, and she gripped it and pulled herself to standing, and every man at the bar stared straight ahead and said nothing, and she stood there for a moment, ribs burning, breathing shallow, the satchel back on her arm, and she looked at every single one of them. None of them looked back. She walked out. Outside, the afternoon sun hit her like something mean. She made it to the alley beside the saloon before her knees gave, and she pressed her back against the rough timber wall and let herself breathe long, slow, deliberate, the way she had taught herself to breathe in the months after Daniel's funeral. When grief would come for her in the middle of the night and she had to hold herself together by will alone. Her ribs were bad. Not broken. She'd broken a rib once falling from a horse at 14, and she remembered that white-hot specific agony. This was cracked maybe 2. It would hurt for weeks. She pressed 2 fingers against her side and cataloged the damage with the same detached efficiency she brought to everything, because falling apart in an alley in Cutter's Bend, Colorado, was not something she had time for. She had 3 days of money. She had one name. And now she had seen the man himself. She had not expected him to be worse than she imagined. That was her miscalculation. She filed it away. She was still standing in the alley, eyes closed, breathing carefully, when she heard Boots stop at the alley entrance. She opened her eyes. He was leaning against the corner of the building with his arms crossed, watching her. Not the way men in that saloon had watched her, not avoiding, not performing ignorance, just watching steady and direct like a man who had decided something and was waiting to see if she had too. He was somewhere north of 35, weathered in the particular way of men who had spent years outdoors and hard. Dark coat trail-worn. A hat pulled low enough that she had to tilt her head to read his face. He wore a gun on his right hip, the way men wore guns when they actually used them, settled, accessible. The leather of the holster rubbed pale with use. He hadn't been in the saloon. She was certain of that. She had cataloged every face when she walked in. "You're still standing," he said. "I noticed that myself," Evelyn said. "Most folks Delk does that till they're on the next stage out." "Is that right?" "It is." He didn't move from the wall. "You planning on leaving?" "No." Something shifted in his face. It wasn't quite surprise. It was closer to recognition, the look of a man who had been waiting for a particular answer and had not been entirely certain he'd get it. "Your husband was Daniel Harper," he said. Evelyn went very still. "Who are you?" "Somebody who's been in this town a lot longer than you." He tilted his head toward the end of the alley. "Walk with me, not here." "I don't know you." "No," he said. "But you know Delk now, and you're standing in his alley with cracked ribs and a satchel full of documents that will get you killed if he finds out you have them." He pushed off the wall. "My name is Cal Mercer, and I knew your husband." She stared at him. "Daniel wrote to me 6 weeks before he died," Cal said. "He said if anything happened to him, there was a woman who'd come looking eventually. Said she'd be the kind of woman who didn't leave." He met her eyes. "He said to tell her the ledger is still here." The breath went out of her carefully because of her ribs, but it went out of her. "You have the ledger," she said. "I know where it is. There's a difference." He glanced back toward the street. "Come on." She didn't move yet. "How did you know Daniel?" "We rode together," Cal said. "A long time ago. Before he was a surveyor, and before I was—" He stopped, started again. "Before either of us was what we are now." "What are you now?" He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a conversation for somewhere else." Evelyn picked up her carpetbag. Her ribs protested. She didn't let it show on her face. "Lead the way," she said. They walked. Cal moved through this back end of Cutter's Bend like a man who had memorized every alley and gap and back door, and Evelyn followed him, cataloging the route, the way she cataloged everything, not because she trusted him, but because she was in an unfamiliar town with cracked ribs and dwindling funds, and a dead husband, and information was the only currency she had left. He took her to a room above the feed store, small, clean in the austere way of a man who traveled light. A bedroll in the corner, saddlebags against the wall, a small table with 2 chairs, and on the table a tin cup, a candle stub, and a folded piece of paper that she recognized before she even reached for it, the heading of the Colorado Territorial Land Survey Office, 1880. She sat down. "You need to let me look at that rib," Cal said. "I need you to tell me what you know about Daniel." "Both things can happen," he said. "Talk while I get the wrap." He moved to his saddlebags. She unfolded the paper. It was not the ledger. It was a letter written in a hand she didn't recognize, addressed to no one, dated 8 months ago. It described a mining claim registered under the name of Daniel Eugene Harper, the precise coordinates of the claim site near Cutter's Ridge, and the notation that said, claim had been transferred under administrative order to the Consolidated Western Mining Company, signed by one H. Delk, acting in his capacity as County Land Registrar. County Land Registrar. He has 2 positions, Evelyn said. 3. Cal came back with a length of linen and crouched in front of her. Sheriff Land Registrar and silent partner in Consolidated Western. You're going to need to lift your arm and hold still. How long has this been going on? 8 years, near as I can tell. He picks the claims that are filed by men who are alone or far from family or in poor health. Finds a reason to delay confirmation. Then the man dies or gets run off, and the transfer happens in the paperwork. Nobody in this county has the authority to question it, and nobody outside the county knows to look. Daniel wasn't alone, she said. He had me. Delk didn't know that. Daniel kept you out of his correspondence deliberately, I think, to protect you. Cal began winding the linen around her midsection with a practiced efficiency that told her this was not his first time doing this. He wrote to me instead, asked me to keep eyes on the claim until he could get back here with the official confirmation. And instead, he died. Yes. The word sat in the room between them, flat and final. How? She asked. The official report said a fall, surveying accident. The official report was written by Harmon Delk. She absorbed that. I don't have proof, Cal said. Not for that part. I have suspicion, and I have a dead man, and I have the pattern of how Delk operates. But suspicion isn't evidence, and pattern isn't proof. What do you have proof of? Cal tied off the wrap and stood up. He looked at her with an expression she was starting to read. Not closed, but careful. A man measuring what to say and how much. There's a federal marshal, he said. Out of Denver. Name of Aldridge. He's been building a case against Delk for 2 years. Fraudulent land transfers, falsified records, possible bribery of territorial officials. He has most of what he needs. Cal paused. What he doesn't have is Daniel's ledger. The original survey ledger. Daniel kept detailed notes, not just coordinates, notations about every conversation he had, every filing he made, every person he spoke to at the land office. He suspected something was wrong before he died. He was documenting it. Cal moved to the window. If that ledger exists, it corroborates everything Aldridge has and puts Delk away for 20 years. Maybe more. Evelyn sat very straight despite her ribs. Where is it? She asked. Hidden, Cal said. In the land office. In a false back behind the filing cabinet in the second room. He turned from the window to look at her. I found it 6 months ago. I didn't take it because if it disappears, Delk will know someone found it, and the whole investigation collapses before Aldridge can move. It has to stay there until we have everything else in place. What else do you need? The transfer documents. The originals, not the copies Delk keeps in the public record, but the originals with the actual signatures, which show the dates of transfer relative to the date of death. They're in Delk's personal safe in the back room of the sheriff's office. He paused. And we have a problem. Tell me. Delk is moving faster than Aldridge anticipated. There's a federal judge coming through the territory in 11 days. Delk has gotten word that questions are being asked in Denver, and he's planning to destroy the physical evidence before that judge arrives. The ledger, the transfer originals, the witness statements he forced. All of it. Cal's voice was even and quiet. We have 11 days. Evelyn looked down at the transfer letter on the table. She looked at Daniel's name typed in bureaucratic ink on a government form as though he were nothing but a claimant number and a case to be closed. She had come to Cutter's Bend for truth. She had not expected to find a federal investigation of former outlaw and a race against a man who had already proven he would put his boot into a woman's ribs in front of 30 witnesses and sleep easy that night. She looked up at Cal Mercer. Tell me everything, she said. All of it, from the beginning. He pulled out the second chair. He sat down, and in the small room above the feed store, with the afternoon light going gold through the single window, and her ribs aching with every breath, Evelyn Harper began to understand the true shape of what had been done and what it was going to take to undo it. She was not afraid. She was, for the first time since Daniel died, something closer to certain. And in the particular silence of that room, the silence of two people deciding together without quite saying so, that they were going to do a very dangerous thing. Cal Mercer looked at this woman who had been kicked to the floor of a saloon, and stood back up and walked out, and he thought that Daniel Harper had been right about her. She was exactly the kind of woman who didn't leave. Cal talked for 2 hours. He did not pace. He did not gesture. He sat in that chair with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely folded, and he laid it out the way a man lays out a hand of cards he has been holding for a very long time, carefully in order without drama, because the facts themselves were dramatic enough. Evelyn listened without interrupting. She had learned that from Daniel, who used to say that the most dangerous thing you could do in a negotiation was fill someone else's silence. So she sat with her wrapped ribs and her tin cup of water that had gone warm, and she listened to Cal Mercer describe the last 8 years of Harmon Delk's operation in Cutter's Bend. And by the time he finished, the room was dark, and the candle stub was burning low, and she had a very clear picture of the man who had put his boot into her side that afternoon. Delk had come to Cutter's Bend in 1873 as a deputy. Within 2 years, he was sheriff. Within 3, he had quietly arranged to also hold the position of county land registrar, a clerical appointment that most people in the county didn't know existed and wouldn't have cared about if they did. It was a bureaucrat's position. Paperwork, filing fees, deed confirmations. It was also the position that controlled who legally owned what in Cutter's Bend County. He started small. A farmer behind on his taxes, whose land was transferred to a Delk associate before the man had time to raise the money. A widow whose homestead claim was denied on a technicality that Delk himself had manufactured. Small enough that nobody connected the dots. Small enough that the people it happened to blamed themselves, blamed bad luck, blamed the territory, and moved on. Then the silver deposits started showing up in the ridge country north of town. The first claim he stole outright was 1877, Cal said. Man named Everett Cole filed a legitimate claim, went back to Denver to finalize his financing. Came back to find the claim had been transferred to Consolidated Western on account of an administrative irregularity that Delk had invented wholesale. Cole tried to fight it, wrote letters to the territorial office, wrote letters to Denver. Cal stopped. Cole's body was found in a ravine outside town 6 weeks later. Ruling was accidental. Evelyn said, like Daniel. Like Daniel. She did not look away from him. How many? That I can confirm. 4 men dead. 7 claims stolen. The total value of those claims at current silver prices is somewhere north of $400,000. Cal let that number sit. Aldridge thinks the real number is higher. He thinks there are transfers we haven't found yet, deaths we don't know to connect. $400,000. Evelyn thought about what $400,000 meant in 1881, what it could buy, what it could protect, what a man would do to keep it. Aldridge, she said. The federal marshal. Where is he now? Denver. He can't come here. Delk has men watching the road in, and a federal marshal riding into Cutter's Bend without a warrant would tip Delk off before we have everything in place. The warrant requires the evidence. The evidence is here. Cal spread his hands. Which is where we are. You said 11 days. 11 days until Judge Raleigh comes through on his circuit. If we can get the evidence to Aldridge before then, he files the warrant, the judge signs it, and Delk is done. If we can't... Cal stopped. Say it, Evelyn said. If we can't, Delk burns the ledger and the transfer originals, and we have nothing. And then Aldridge has nothing. And then whatever Delk wants to do about the two of us, he does it with no consequences. The candle guttered. Evelyn looked at the flame. She thought about Daniel, who had sat somewhere in this same town writing letters in the margins of photographs because he was afraid to say certain things plainly. She thought about his handwriting in those margins, small, precise, the hand of a man who measured things for a living and knew the difference between approximate and exact. He knows. 2 words, and then 6 weeks later, a ravine outside town and a ruling that said accidental and a widow in Denver who did not believe it for one single moment. What do you need me to do? She asked. Cal looked at her steadily. The land office, he said. I can't go in there. Delk's men know my face. I've been in this town long enough that I'm noticed when I move. But you're a widow with a legitimate claim. You have legal standing to request access to records pertaining to your husband's property. It's the one door in this town that's actually open to you. The clerk, she said. Who runs the land office? Man named Pruitt. Chester Pruitt. He's not a bad man, that's the worst thing about him. He's a man who looks the other way because looking away is easier and safer, and he has a wife and 3 children and a mortgage on his house that Delk holds the paper on. Cal's jaw tightened. Delk is very good at making sure the people around him have something to lose. So Pruitt won't help us. Pruitt will do exactly what Delk tells him to do. But he'll do it slowly, the way a man does things when he's ashamed of them. And that slowness is the gap we need. Evelyn turned this over in her mind. I go in, I request the records. Pruitt stalls me, gives me forms to fill, tells me to come back, standard obstruction. While I'm occupying his attention, I go in the back, Cal said. I've done it before. There's a window on the east side that doesn't latch properly. I can be in and out of the back room in 12 minutes if I'm not interrupted. And the ledger stays where it is until we have the transfer documents from Delk's safe. We need both together or Delk's lawyers pick it apart. 1 document is a piece of evidence. 2 documents that corroborate each other are a case. Evelyn nodded slowly. When? Tomorrow. Land office opens at 8. Delk takes his breakfast at the hotel until 9 most mornings. That's our window. Cal leaned forward. But Mrs. Harper, if this goes wrong, if Pruitt sends for Delk, if someone sees me at that window, it goes wrong fast. You understand that? I understand it. And you're still? Yes, she said before he finished the question. I'm still. Something moved in Cal Mercer's face. Not quite relief. Something older than relief. All right, he said. She slept on the bedroll in the corner. Cal slept sitting up in the chair, which struck her, even in her exhaustion, as a thing she should probably ask about. At some point, a man who slept sitting up in chairs was a man with a particular kind of history. But that was tomorrow's question. She closed her eyes and thought about Daniel, and about $400,000, and about 11 days, and then her body made the decision for her, and she slept. She was up before first light. Her ribs had stiffened overnight, and pulling herself upright from the floor was a slow and deliberate process that she completed without making a sound, because Cal was still in the chair, and she did not want him to see her struggle. When she was standing, she stood for a moment with one hand against the wall, breathing through the tightness, and then she straightened and crossed to the small basin on the table and washed her face in cold water and was ready. Cal was watching her when she turned around. She had no idea how long he'd been awake. Ribs bad? He asked. Manageable. That's not what I asked. It's the answer I have, she said. Tell me about Pruitt. What does he respond to flattery, authority, sympathy? Cal considered this seriously, which she appreciated. Procedure, he said. Pruitt is a man who cares about doing things correctly. It's how he lives with himself. He tells himself he just follows the rules, whatever the rules happen to be. If you come in demanding and emotional, he locks up. If you come in with correct forms filled out correctly, talking about proper legal process, he has a harder time saying no. So I speak his language. You give him paperwork he can file and feel good about filing. Cal reached into his coat and produced 3 folded documents. These are copies of Daniel's original claim filing. I had them made in Denver 3 months ago. And this one is a formal records request in the proper territorial format, which I also had made because I knew this moment was coming eventually. Evelyn took the documents. She unfolded each one and read it fully, which took several minutes, and Cal waited in silence while she did. These are correct, she said. I know how to prepare a document. Former outlaw who knows federal land law, Evelyn said. That's an interesting combination. I've had an interesting life. She looked at him over the edge of the paper. How much of it are you going to tell me? Enough, he said, when it's relevant. She accepted that and folded the documents back into order. 8 o'clock was 40 minutes away. They went over the plan twice more. Then Cal showed her the route from the feed store to the land office, not through the main street, which was already showing signs of morning activity, but through the alley system he had clearly spent considerable time mapping. She memorized it. She was good at memorizing routes. Daniel had always said she had the mind of a surveyor herself, which had been his highest compliment. At 5 minutes to 8, she walked into the Cutter's Bend land office alone. Chester Pruitt was a small man, narrow through the shoulders, with the look of someone who had once intended to become something more than he was and had made his peace with it in stages. He was arranging papers on his desk when she came in, and he looked up with the expression of a man who hoped this was simple. Good morning, Evelyn said pleasantly. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm here to request access to the registered claim records for a survey filed by Daniel Eugene Harper in the spring of 1880. Pruitt's expression flickered. So fast she almost missed it. He knew the name. Mrs. Harper, he said carefully. Yes. She placed the records request on his desk, properly filled, properly formatted. I have the claim filing number, the original survey coordinates, and a notarized copy of my husband's death certificate establishing my standing as heir to any registered claims. I believe that's everything the territorial code requires for a records access request. Pruitt looked down at the documents. He picked up the records request. He read it with the focused attention of a man who was hoping to find something wrong with it and was not finding it. This is all in order, he said, which sounded like it cost him something. "I thought it might be," Evelyn said. "My husband was very thorough in his filing practices. I learned from him." She smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. "How long does a standard records request take to process?" We ask for 2 to 3 days." "Of course. Would it be possible for me to look at the general index while I wait? I'd like to confirm the filing number against your records, just to make sure we're working from the same reference." Pruitt hesitated. "It's public record," Evelyn added. "The index. Anyone can request to see the public index." He couldn't argue with that. The territorial code was explicit. He knew it. She knew he knew it. "One moment," he said, and went through the door to the back room. The moment he disappeared, Evelyn moved to the side of the desk closest to the back wall and positioned herself with a clear sightline to both the front door and the hallway beside the filing cabinets, so that if anyone came in, she could respond naturally, and if Pruitt came back faster than expected, she would see him coming. She did not look toward the east window. She did not look toward it once. She counted seconds in her head. She had reached 43 when a floorboard creaked in the back room. She moved back to the front of the desk and was examining the framed territorial survey map on the wall when Pruitt returned carrying a large bound index volume. "The public index," he said, setting it on the desk. "Thank you so much," she said warmly, and opened it to the H section and began to read. She had been reading for approximately 6 minutes, long enough for the back of her neck to develop the particular tightness of a woman pretending to be calm when the front door opened. Not Delk. A ranch hand dusty from the road, wanting to file a livestock brand registration. Pruitt dealt with him at the counter. Evelyn kept her eyes on the index and her hand steady and counted the minutes. 8 minutes. 9. 10. At 11 minutes, she heard the faint scrape of a window latch from somewhere in the building. Not loud enough for Pruitt to hear over the ranch hand's voice, but she heard it. 12 minutes. "I think I've found the reference," she said, turning from the index. "Filing number CS-1880-447. Is that consistent with your internal records?" Pruitt looked up from the ranch hand's paperwork. "I'd need to check the main register." "Of course. Take your time." He went back to the counter. She turned back to the index and breathed. 14 minutes. The ranch hand left. Pruitt looked at her with the expression of a man who wanted her to leave next. "I'll have an answer on your records request by Thursday," he said. "We're short-staffed this week." "Thursday," she repeated. "That's 2 days." "Yes, ma'am." "And if I wanted to check back tomorrow, would there be any preliminary?" "Thursday," Pruitt said, and his voice had gone flat in a way that told her she had reached the edge of what he would give her. "Thursday it is," she said pleasantly. "Thank you for your help." She walked out. She went back through the alley and climbed the stairs above the feed store and was 2 steps inside the room when Cal appeared from behind the door, and the look on his face told her before he said a single word. "I found something," he said. He spread 3 documents on the table. They were not the transfer originals, those were still in Delk's safe, but they were something she had not expected. Something Cal's expression told her was both better and worse than what they'd planned for. The first was a handwritten list. Names, dates, claim numbers, dollar amounts. Written in a hand she didn't recognize, but written with the detailed knowledge of someone on the inside. Someone who had access to the transfer records and had been keeping their own account of them secretly for what appeared to be at least 2 years. The second was a letter unsigned addressed to the territorial governor's office in Denver. It described Delk's operation in specific terms, the mechanism of the transfers, the falsified death rulings, the intimidation of witnesses. It had never been sent. It had been hidden in the false back alongside Daniel's ledger, tucked behind it, as though someone had placed it there for safekeeping, and then either lost their nerve or lost their life. The third was a badge receipt. A deputy sheriff's commission issued to a man named Crest Walker and then stamped revoked in red ink dated 14 months ago. Evelyn looked up. "Someone inside," she said. "Someone inside who tried to report it and couldn't. Cal said. Someone who built their own record of it. Someone Delk eventually figured out and stripped of their badge. Crestwalker. Crestwalker. Cal's voice was careful. I know who he is. He's still in town. Works at the livery stable on the south end. Delk kept him here after revoking his commission. I always figured it was to watch him, keep him close, make sure he didn't talk. He's a witness, Evelyn said. He's a terrified man who tried once to do the right thing and got crushed for it. Cal met her eyes. If we can get him to talk, to sign a statement, to agree to testify, his testimony combined with the ledger and the transfer documents would be ironclad. Aldridge could file within 48 hours. And if Walker refuses, then we proceed without him and hope it's enough. Cal folded the documents carefully. But there's something else. She waited. The list, he said. The one in Walker's handwriting. There are 9 names on it, Mrs. Harper. 9 claims, 9 transfers. He paused. The last name on the list is Daniel Harper's, but there's a notation beside it that the others don't have. He turned the list so she could read it. It says W before the claim, W before the death. The room went very quiet. W, Evelyn said. I think it means witnessed. I think Walker was there when whatever happened to Daniel happened, or close enough to it to know it wasn't an accident. She sat down. She had spent 14 months telling herself that Daniel's death had not been an accident. She had said it plainly in her own mind, in the dark, in the space between certainty and proof. But this was different. This was ink on paper. This was another human being's handwriting confirming what she had known in her bones. He saw it, she said. Or he saw enough. Then we need to talk to Walker. Yes, Cal said. Tonight, after dark at the livery. If Delk's men see us walking in there in daylight, it's over before it starts. Evelyn looked at the list. At Daniel's name at the bottom with those 3 letters beside it. W before the claim. W before the death. There's one more thing, Cal said, and his voice had changed in a way that made her look up. Tell me. While I was in the back room, I heard Pruitt on the other side of the wall. He was talking to someone. Not the ranch hand, this was after the ranch hand left before you came back out. Cal's jaw was set. He was talking to Delk. The air in the room went sharp. What did he say? I couldn't hear everything, but I heard your name. And I heard Delk say. Cal stopped, collected himself. He said, give her Thursday, then we handle it. Evelyn did not move. We handle it. 3 words. The same casual certainty as a boot into a woman's ribs. The same practiced calm. He's going to move against us before Thursday, she said. Before Thursday, Cal confirmed. Which means we don't have 11 days anymore. How long? I'd say 48 hours, maybe less. He looked at her directly. Walker tonight. Transfer documents tomorrow if Walker gives us what we need to know where Delk keeps them. And then we get everything to Aldridge before Delk realizes we have it. 48 hours. Evelyn thought about Daniel's ledger sitting in its hiding place behind a filing cabinet in the back room of a corrupt man's land office, waiting for someone to finally use it the way Daniel had intended. She thought about Chester Pruitt arranging his papers in order and telling himself he just followed the rules. She thought about Crest Walker shoveling hay at a livery stable because Harmon Delk had decided that was where he belonged and waiting, or maybe not even waiting anymore for someone to come along who wasn't afraid. All right, she said, and her voice was steady and certain and very quiet. Tonight. The livery. The day passed in the particular tense slowness of waiting. Cal went out twice, once to check on something he didn't explain, and once to buy food from the store on the next block, coming back with bread and dried beef and a jar of preserves that he set on the table without ceremony. They ate. They went over the plan for Walker. Cal told her the layout of the livery stable in the careful detail of a man who had already scouted it, which meant he had been planning this longer than she'd known him. She asked him about that. How long have you been waiting for someone to come? She said. He was quiet for a moment. Since I found the ledger, he said. 6 months. I couldn't move alone. One man with evidence isn't a case, it's a target. I needed the widow. He looked at the table. Daniel told me you'd come. He said if it went wrong, you would come. He knew it might go wrong. He thought it might go wrong, Cal said. He hoped he was being paranoid, but he prepared for it. He didn't tell me any of this, she said. He was trying to protect me. Yes. And instead I came here alone and got kicked across a saloon floor on my first afternoon. Yes. Something shifted in Cal's expression that was almost, not quite, but almost amusement. He may have underestimated you slightly. He did that sometimes, Evelyn said. He was a good man, but he thought being gentle with me was the same as protecting me. And it's not. No, she said. It is not. Cal looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, he was right about you. Every word he wrote. She didn't answer that. There was nothing to answer that didn't feel like more than the conversation they were having. The dark came slow, and they were ready for it. They moved through the alley system to the south end of town, silent and unhurried, the way Cal moved through Cutter's Bend, like someone who had learned to exist in it without belonging to it. The livery stable was quiet, just the sounds of horses shifting in their stalls and the lamp burning low inside. Crestwalker was forking hay into the last stall when they came in. He was a big man, run to gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had been handsome once before. Something had worked on it for a long time. He heard them come in and didn't startle. He went very still, which was worse. The stillness of a man who had been expecting something bad for so long that he'd stopped flinching at the approach of it. He turned and saw Cal, and something moved across his face. I told you before, Walker said. His voice was low and rough. I can't. I know what you told me, Cal said. This is Evelyn Harper, Daniel Harper's widow. Walker looked at her. The stillness became something else entirely. Something that looked for just a moment like pain. Ma'am, he said. Mr. Walker, she said. I know what you saw. I know what's written on that list. And I'm not here to push you somewhere you don't want to go. She stepped forward just slightly. I'm here to tell you that there's a federal marshal with a case that's almost complete. I'm here to tell you that the ledger is still there, and we're going to get it, and we're going to get the transfer documents. And when this goes to a federal judge, your testimony will mean the difference between Delk spending his life in prison and Delk walking out of a courtroom on a technicality. Walker stared at her. Daniel Harper did nothing wrong, she said. He found something valuable, and he filed the correct paperwork, and he kept careful notes, and he died for it. And the man who arranged that death has been sleeping in a fine hotel on this street for 14 months while my husband is in the ground. Her voice did not waver. It never wavered. I would very much like to change that. I think you would too. The lamplight moved between them. Walker gripped the handle of the pitchfork. His knuckles went white. My wife, he said. My kids. Delk knows where they are. I know, Cal said. That's why we move in 48 hours, before he can reach them. You don't know Delk. I know Delk better than you think, Cal said, and something in his voice made Walker go still again. I know exactly what he'll do and when. And I'm telling you that if we move in the next 48 hours, you and your family are safer in a federal witness arrangement than you are standing in this stable. Walker looked at Evelyn. She held his gaze and didn't fill the silence. He set down the pitchfork. The safe, he said. In Delk's office. I know the combination. Cal went absolutely still. I set the safe, Walker said. When I was still deputy, I set the combination and I wrote it down, and I never told Delk I'd written it down because I thought... He stopped. I thought I'd need it someday. I just didn't know for what. Evelyn looked at Cal. Cal looked at Walker. Tell me, Cal said. And Walker told him. The night had gone fully dark outside, and somewhere in the Rusty Spur Saloon, Harmon Delk was finishing his third whiskey and telling himself that Thursday was enough time, that the widow from Denver would be handled like all the others, that Cutter's Bend was his, and would remain his, and that the man watching from the shadows of this town was nobody, was nothing, was a ghost. He had nothing to worry about. He was wrong about all of it. But he didn't know that yet. Walker wrote the combination on a piece of brown paper torn from a feed sack, 3 numbers in his careful deputy's handwriting, and handed it to Cal without looking at either of them. Cal folded it once and put it in his breast pocket. "There's something else," Walker said. He had put the pitchfork against the wall and was standing with his arms at his sides, a man who had made a decision and was still feeling the weight of it settle onto his shoulders. Delk keeps a second set of records, not in the safe. In his desk, the center drawer under a false bottom. It's a ledger of payments to the territorial official who approved his land registrar appointment to the judge who ruled on the coal inquest to 2 men in Denver whose names I don't know, but whose positions I suspect. He looked at Cal. If Aldrich has those names, the whole network comes down. Not just Delk. Cal was quiet for a moment. "You've been sitting on this for 14 months. I've been staying alive for 14 months. Walker said, and his voice had an edge in it that was not anger and not self-pity, but something between the two that only comes from a man who has had a long time to think about the difference between courage and survival. "I have a 12-year-old daughter, Mr. Mercer. I have a wife who doesn't sleep through the night anymore because she knows what kind of man Delk is. I have been sitting on this because I watched what happened to Daniel Harper, and I knew exactly what Delk would do if I moved too soon without enough to finish it." Evelyn said, "And now?" Walker looked at her. "Now you're here," he said. "And you're still here. After what he did to you in that saloon, you're still standing in my livery at midnight asking me to trust you." He exhaled. "Daniel used to talk about you. When he was working the Ridge survey, he'd come by for water sometimes and we'd talk. He talked about you a lot." He paused. "He said you were the most clear-eyed person he'd ever known. Said you could look at a problem from the outside and see the whole shape of it without getting lost in the middle." He looked at the floor. "I think he meant it as love." Evelyn did not say anything for a moment. "He meant it as love," she said quietly. "I know." Walker straightened his shoulders, and something in the set of them changed the gradual shift of a man who has been bent under a particular weight for a long time, finally deciding to stand upright and feel what it costs. "All right, whatever you need me to do," Cal said. "Tomorrow night, we need you at the sheriff's office at midnight. We go in through the back, Walker. You know the layout better than anyone. You get us to the desk, I get to the safe. Mrs. Harper documents everything as we go." "You want me inside," Walker said. "I need you inside. The desk drawer, I wouldn't have known about the false bottom. What else don't I know about that building?" Walker was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There's a man Delk keeps in the back cell most nights. Not a prisoner, a man named Briggs. He runs Delk's dirtier business, and Delk likes him close. He sleeps light, and he's fast with a gun." "Where does Delk sleep?" "The hotel. Always. He doesn't sleep in the jail building, says it smells like failure." Something crossed Walker's face that might have been contempt. "He comes in at 7 every morning and leaves after supper. Briggs locks up and stays." "So Briggs is our problem," Cal said. "Briggs is a problem that needs to not become a shooting problem," Walker said. "If there are shots fired in that building, the whole town wakes up and Delk is there in 10 minutes. Then we handle Briggs before we go in," Cal said. He looked at Walker. "Can you get him out of the building for 20 minutes tomorrow night?" Walker thought about this. "There's a woman on the north end of town. Briggs visits her on Thursday nights when Delk lets him off his leash. If I told Briggs that Delk said he could go early..." "Briggs trusts you." "Briggs doesn't trust anyone, but he wants to believe it badly enough that he'll check with Delk's man at the saloon, and Delk's man at the saloon is a drinker who by midnight won't remember clearly what Delk said or didn't say." Walker's jaw set. "It'll work. It has to work." They left the livery separately, 10 minutes apart, the way Cal insisted on doing everything, staggered, careful nothing that looked like a pattern to anyone watching the street. Evelyn walked back through the alleys alone, which Cal had objected to, and she had overruled on the grounds that a woman walking alone at night was less conspicuous than a woman with a man who carried himself the way Cal Mercer carried himself. She was right, and he knew it, which was why he let her go. She made it back to the room above the feed store and sat on the edge of the bedroll and pressed her hands flat on her knees and breathed slowly in the dark. Walker's words were still with her. "He talked about you a lot." She could hear Daniel's voice in that, the particular warmth of it, the way he had of talking about things he loved with the same precise care he brought to everything else, measuring out his words, the way he measured coordinates, making sure each one landed exactly where he intended. She had not let herself grieve properly since she arrived in Cutter's Bend. There was no room for it. Grief was a luxury that required stillness, and she had not been still. She allowed herself 30 seconds of it now, in the dark alone. Then she put it away and lay down and slept. Morning came in hard and bright, and Cal was already at the table with the 3 documents from the land office spread out and a 4th piece of paper he was writing on in a small, tight hand. "What's that?" she asked. "Letter to Aldridge, updating him on where we are. I have a way to get it to him that doesn't go through the Cutter's Bend post." He didn't look up from the paper. "There's a freight driver who runs the northern route twice a week. He's reliable, and he owes me. He leaves at noon." Evelyn poured water from the jug and drank. "Does Aldridge know about Walker?" "Not yet. He will by tonight." Cal finished the letter and folded it precisely. "Aldridge is going to want to move fast once he gets this, which means we need to move faster." "We're already moving tonight." "I know, but there's a complication." He set down the pen. "I went out at first light, before you were awake." He said it without apology. "Delk's man, the one he keeps at the saloon, the one Walker said Briggs would check with, he wasn't there this morning. Nobody's seen him since last night." Evelyn set down the cup. "He's been moved. Or he left on his own. Or Delk moved him because something spooked him." Cal's voice was measured and careful, which she had learned meant he was more concerned than he was letting show. "I don't know which, but it changes the Walker plan because Briggs won't have anyone to check with, and a man like Briggs without a way to verify is a man who stays put. Then we need a different way to move Briggs." "I'm working on it." "Tell me what you have." Cal looked at her. She had noticed a habit of that. A momentary pause before answering her that was not reluctance, but something closer to recalibration, like a man adjusting to the fact of being asked by someone who expected a real answer. "There's a fire," he said. "Not a real one. A controlled burn in the alley behind the general store, enough smoke, enough noise to pull Briggs out to look. I was trying to avoid it because it draws attention. But if the saloon man is gone, a fire at what time?" 11:30 gives Briggs time to go look, confirm it's nothing serious, come back. 20 minutes, maybe 25. And if he doesn't come back, then we have more time than we planned for. Cal leaned back in his chair. The risk is that someone else calls it in to Delk directly. Who in this town calls things into Delk at 11:30 at night? Cal was quiet for a moment. "Pruitt," he said. "Then we need Pruitt occupied." "With what?" Evelyn looked at the documents on the table. She thought about Chester Pruitt and his careful forms and his mortgage that Delk held and his 3 children and his need to believe that following rules made him different from the men who broke them. "With me," she said. Cal shook his head before she finished the word. "No. Listen. If you're with Pruitt at 11:30 at night, Delk hears about it before midnight. Pruitt will tell him. Not if Pruitt thinks he's helping me," she said. "Not if I give him a reason to feel like the right thing and the safe thing are the same thing." She pulled the records request across the table. "I go to his house. His home, not the office. I tell him I've received information that the land office records are going to be tampered with tonight, which is true, and that as the registrar, he has a legal obligation to secure the documents. I make him afraid of his own liability. I give him a reason to be in that office at 11:30 that has nothing to do with calling Delk." Cal stared at her. "You put Pruitt in the land office," he said slowly, "where he is occupied, nervous, and not talking to anyone because he's trying to protect himself." She met his eyes. "And when we come out of the sheriff's office with the transfer documents, we have a witness who can confirm the state of the land office records before and after. An official witness." The silence in the room had a different quality than their other silences. This one was Cal Mercer recalculating. He started. It'll work, she said. It might work, he said. And if it doesn't, we're in the same position we were already in. She looked at him steadily. I'm going Cal. She had used his first name without deciding to. He noticed. She noticed that he noticed. All right, he said. But you take Walker with you to Pruitt's door. I need Pruitt to see that a former deputy is the one bringing this to him. It makes it official, gives it weight. And you. I'll be in position at the sheriff's office by 11:15. He picked up his coffee. And I'll set the fire myself at 11:28. She nodded. Then we have a plan. We have several plans stitched together with hope and good timing, he said. In my experience, that's the best kind. The day was the longest Evelyn could remember, since the days immediately after Daniel's funeral, when time had gone strange and thick, and every hour felt like something she had to physically push through. She organized the documents. She read through Walker's list 3 more times, memorizing the names, the claim numbers, the amounts. She read Aldridge's prior correspondence that Cal had brought with him from Denver, learning the shape of the federal case from the outside in. She ate. She rested her ribs. She thought about Daniel's ledger sitting in the dark behind a filing cabinet 20 yards away. At 4 in the afternoon, something happened that none of them had planned for. Walker came. He came to the back of the feed store, and Evelyn heard him on the stairs before Cal did, and Cal was on his feet with his hand at his hip when Walker appeared in the doorway, and the look on Walker's face made both of them go still. Delk knows, Walker said. The room contracted. What does he know? Cal said. His voice was very quiet. Not everything, but something. Walker stepped inside and closed the door. He was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from the particular breathlessness of controlled fear. One of Delk's men came by the livery this afternoon. Casual, just talking. Asked me if I'd had any interesting visitors lately. He looked at Evelyn. He said it looking at me, not in a way that was casual. What did you say? Said the only visitors I'd had were a couple of ranch hands wanting their horses reshod. Walker pressed his back against the wall. He let it sit for a minute, and then he said, the widow from Denver seems like a determined woman, just like that. Like it was nothing. Like he was talking about the weather. Cal said, he's fishing. He's doing more than fishing. When the man left, I watched him go straight to the telegraph office. Walker's jaw tightened. The telegraph office that's been closed for 1.5 years. The implication landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. It's not closed, Evelyn said. It's not closed for Delk, Cal said. He turned to the window, didn't look out of it, just turned toward it thinking. He's contacting someone, Denver most likely, trying to find out who Evelyn Harper is and who she might be connected to. If he contacts the right people in Denver and the wrong name comes up, Aldridge, Evelyn said, or anyone near Aldridge's office. Cal turned back. It doesn't change tonight. It moves tonight up. He looked at Walker. We go at 10, not midnight, 10 o'clock. Walker blinked. Briggs won't be gone at 10. Then we deal with Briggs differently. Cal's voice had gone to the flat, certain quality she recognized as the voice he used when he had already made a decision and was just informing the rest of the room. There's a way to do it that doesn't require him to leave. It requires him to be unconscious. Walker stared at him. I used to be very good at this, Cal said in a tone that did not invite further questions. What came next happened fast. The way the second half of any dangerous plan always happens. Compressed, pressurized. No room for hesitation. Walker went back to the livery to wait. Cal went out and came back 40 minutes later with something in a small glass bottle that he put in his coat pocket and did not explain beyond saying, Briggs takes his coffee at 9:30 every night. The diner on the corner delivers it. I know the boy who delivers it. Evelyn didn't ask how he knew the boy. She was learning that Cal Mercer knew the useful people in every situation, and that the how of it was usually a long story with a complicated moral, and they didn't have time for long stories tonight. The Pruitt plan still stands, she said. Yes, Different timing. You go to Pruitt at 9. Tell him the threat is immediate tonight. You need him at the land office by 9:30 to secure the records. And Walker. Walker comes with you to Pruitt's door, then doubles back to meet me. Cal checked the small glass bottle once and put it away. And Evelyn. She looked up. When Pruitt opens the land office. He stopped. Started again. If there's an opportunity. If you're alone in that office for any reason at all. He looked at her steadily. Take the ledger. You said, I know what I said. The situation has changed. If Delk is already spooked and moving, leaving that ledger in place one more night is a gamble I'm not willing to take. He met her eyes. You know where it is. False back behind the filing cabinet in the second room. It's a wooden panel comes loose if you press the lower left corner. If Pruitt is in the building, then you find a reason to be alone for 3 minutes. You're a resourceful woman, Mrs. Harper. I have complete confidence in your ability to send a man to check on something. She almost smiled. She didn't quite. What does it look like? She asked. The ledger. Brown cover. Daniel's initials on the spine, DH. In gold, the kind surveyors use to mark their equipment. He paused. It's about the size of a hymnal. About the size of a hymnal. Evelyn thought about Daniel in a church pew he had loved. Hymns had a genuinely terrible singing voice, and had sung anyway with complete, cheerful, unapologetic commitment. She thought about that for exactly 2 seconds. Then she put it away. I'll find a reason, she said. Chester Pruitt opened his front door at 9 o'clock. In his shirt sleeves, a man interrupted mid-evening, and when he saw Evelyn Harper and Crest Walker standing on his porch, his face did 3 things in very quick succession. It went pale, it tried to recover, and it failed. Mrs. Harper, he said. Walker. I'm sorry to come to your home, Mr. Pruitt, Evelyn said. I wouldn't be here if it weren't urgent. She looked at him with the direct, clear-eyed gaze that Daniel had loved, and that she had discovered over the course of her life, made most men either straighten up or shrink. Chester Pruitt straightened up. I have information that the records in your office are going to be tampered with tonight, before morning. I thought you deserved to know. Pruitt's jaw worked. What kind of information? The specific kind, she said. I'll explain everything at the office, but we need to go now. Mrs. Harper, if you're suggesting that someone is planning to... Mr. Pruitt? Walker spoke for the first time, and his voice had the quiet authority of a man who used to carry a badge and hadn't entirely put it down. You are the county land registrar. The security of those records is your legal responsibility. Whatever else is going on in this town, that is a fact. He looked at Pruitt steadily. You know what those records contain. You know what it means if they're altered. And you know that if they are altered and it comes out that you were home in your shirt sleeves when it happened, there is no version of that story where you come out clean. The words landed exactly where Walker intended them to land. Pruitt got his coat. The land office at 9:15 at night had the particular stillness of a place that has held too many secrets for too long. Pruitt unlocked the front door with hands that were not entirely steady and lit the lamp on his desk, and stood looking at Evelyn and Walker with the expression of a man who had waded into a river and was only now beginning to calculate the depth. The records request I filed this morning, Evelyn said. Has anyone else accessed those records today since I was here? I. Pruitt started. Mr. Pruitt, has anyone accessed those records? Sheriff Delk came by at 2 o'clock, Pruitt said in the voice of a man confessing to a priest. He looked at the Harper file. He didn't take anything. He just looked at it. Evelyn kept her face neutral. And the general index was that accessed? No, just the file. Then we need to verify the index is intact. If you could compare the current entries against the register for the past 6 months. She gestured toward the back room. That's in the back register, correct? Yes, it's... Pruitt turned toward the back room. Yes, I'll need to pull the back register. Wonderful. Walker can help you carry it. She looked at Walker. He understood immediately. I'll start on the front index. Pruitt and Walker went into the back room. The moment the door was mostly closed, Evelyn moved. She was not running. Running made noise, made panic, left marks. She walked quickly and with complete certainty, the way Daniel had walked across ridge terrain, each step placed deliberately. The second room was a storage room with floor-to-ceiling filing cabinets accessible through the back of the main office, and the door was not fully closed, and she could hear Pruitt explaining the register system to Walker in the hushed, embarrassed way of a man who needed to feel useful. The filing cabinet against the east wall. She pressed the lower left corner of the wooden panel. It gave. Behind it was a space no bigger than a bread box, shallow, deliberate, built by someone who knew what they were hiding and how long they might need to hide it. Inside was a brown ledger with gold initials on the spine. D.H. She picked it up with both hands and held it for one moment. It was lighter than she expected. It was exactly the size of a hymnal. She put it inside her jacket against her wrapped ribs, which protested and pressed the panel back until it clicked and walked back through the door and was standing at the front index, looking at the January 1880 entries when Pruitt came back carrying the back register with Walker behind him. "Found it," Pruitt said. "Good?" Evelyn said. Her voice was steady. Her ribs were on fire. "Let's start with January. They worked through the register for 40 minutes. Pruitt cross-referencing. Walker making notes. Evelyn asking careful procedural questions that kept Pruitt engaged and slightly off balance and thoroughly occupied. At 10:17, a sound came from the direction of the sheriff's office that all three of them heard. Not a shot. Not a crash. A single raised voice quickly cut off, and then silence. Pruitt's head came up. "What was that?" he said. "Probably nothing." Walker said too quickly. He caught himself. "Sound carries strange at night." Pruitt looked at the wall in the direction of the sheriff's office. His face had gone careful and still, and Evelyn watched him making calculations behind his eyes. Then his gaze dropped to her jacket. She saw the moment he saw it, the slight irregularity at her side, the edge of something that wasn't there before. She watched him see it, and she watched him understand it, and she watched him decide what to do about what he understood. Chester Pruitt looked at Daniel Harper's widow standing in his office with Daniel Harper's ledger under her coat, and he looked back down at his register, down. "January entries look correct," he said in the voice of a man who had just made a decision he would spend a long time thinking about. "Let's move on to February." Evelyn breathed once carefully and said February, yes. Across the street in the dark of the sheriff's office back room, Cal Mercer's hands found the safe, and his fingers found the dial, and the numbers Walker had written on brown paper turned in sequence in the silence. And somewhere in the building, something shifted, and then the safe opened, and Cal reached inside and pulled out the future of Harmon Delk's empire of stolen land and dead men's claims, and he held it in his hands, and the night outside was perfectly dangerously still. And then the front door of the sheriff's office opened, and the lamp came on. And Harmon Delk's voice, flat and cold and completely certain, said, "I had a feeling." Cal did not move. He stood in the back room of the sheriff's office with the transfer documents in his hands, and the safe hanging open behind him, and the lamplight from the front room coming through the gap in the door. And he did not move, because moving was the thing that would confirm what Delk already suspected. And in the space between suspicion and certainty, there was sometimes just enough room for a man to think. Delk walked slowly. Cal could hear it, the deliberate, unhurried bootfalls of a man who was in no rush because he believed he had already won. "Mercer," Delk said. Not a question. Cal stepped through the door into the front room. He held the documents at his side, not hidden, not displayed, just held. Delk stood near the front entrance, his coat still on his hat, still on, which meant he had come straight here without stopping. Behind him, two men, not deputies, not anyone with a badge, just men with guns and the specific blankness of men who were paid to be blank. Delk himself was not yet holding his weapon. He was looking at Cal with the pale blue eyes that Cal had seen looking at Evelyn from across a saloon floor, and the expression in them was not anger. It was satisfaction. "I thought it might be you," Delk said. "When my man at the telegraph came back with your name, I thought that's who's been sitting in my town all this time. Cal Mercer. He tilted his head slightly. You've gotten careful in your old age. I'll give you that. Harmon, Cal said. They had met once before. 8 years ago, briefly, in a different county, under different circumstances that neither of them needed to name. Cal had been someone else then, so arguably had Delk. The difference was the direction each of them had traveled since. You want to put those down? Delk said, nodding at the documents. I don't think I do, Cal said. You're standing in my office holding property that belongs to this county. That's theft, Mercer. That's a crime I can deal with right now without any inconvenient paperwork. These documents, Cal said, keeping his voice level, describe the fraudulent transfer of 9 mining claims from their legal owners to a shell company you control. They contain your signature on transfers executed within days of the registered owners' deaths. He paused. That's not county property. That's evidence. Delk looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was the smile of a man who had been in tight situations before and knew what they felt like from the inside and was not worried. Evidence, he said. For who? You're a former outlaw with a warrant outstanding in 2 territories, Mercer. You think a federal court is going to take your word against mine, against a county sheriff with 8 years of service? He took 1 step forward. Put the documents down. Walk out. I'll give you until dawn to clear my county, and that's more than you deserve. Cal did not put the documents down. Where's the woman? Delk said. His voice had gone quieter, which was worse than when it was loud. Because she's not in the feed store. I had a man check 20 minutes ago. I don't know where she is, Cal said. Which was technically true. He knew where she was supposed to be, but not where she was at this exact moment. And in situations like this, technical truth was the only kind worth speaking. She's got something of mine, Delk said. I know she went to Pruitt. I know she's been in that land office. And I know that ledger has been sitting in that building for 6 months, which means somebody in this town knew it was there and didn't tell me. The satisfaction in his face had shifted into something colder. That's a disappointment I'm going to deal with separately. Walker. Delk hadn't named him yet, but he was circling toward it. Cal needed to keep him circling away. The woman is irrelevant, Cal said. Whatever she has or doesn't have doesn't change what I'm holding right now. What you're holding, Delk said, is a problem. He nodded at the man on his left. The man moved faster than Cal had calculated, and Cal had 2 choices in the half-second available to him, which was to go for his gun and make this a shooting problem in an enclosed space with 2 armed men and no cover, or to take the hit and stay alive long enough to find another option. He chose the second, because he was outnumbered and because there were people outside this building counting on him to stay functional. The man's fist connected with Cal's jaw and the documents went sideways, and Cal went into the desk and caught himself on its edge and came back up without going down, which cost him something in the ribs and something in the jaw, and nothing he decided that wasn't manageable. The documents were on the floor. Delk crouched and picked them up. He straightened them. He looked at them for a moment, not reading them, just confirming they were what he thought they were. This is the 3rd time someone has tried to use these against me, he said. You'd think people would learn. What happened to the first 2? Cal said. His jaw was already swelling. Same thing that happens to problems in Cutter's Bend, Delk said. He handed the documents to the man on his right. Put him in the back cell. And find Walker. He's in that land office, I'd bet my badge on it. The man reached for Cal's arm, and the front door opened. All 4 of them turned. Chester Pruitt stood in the doorway. He was in his shirt sleeves, no coat, holding a large bound register against his chest with both arms. His face was the color of old paper, and he was breathing in the shallow, deliberate way of a man who had talked himself into something on the walk over and was not entirely sure he had talked himself in far enough. Delk stared at him. Pruitt. Sheriff. Pruitt's voice wobbled on the first syllable and steadied on the second. I need to speak with you about the land office records. Not now, Chester. Now, Pruitt said. I need to speak with you now. It was the first time Cal suspected that Chester Pruitt had said that word to Harmon Delk in 8 years. The effect was visible not on Delk's face, which was trained against visible effects, but in the quality of the silence that followed it. Even the two armed men shifted slightly. Delk's eyes moved from Pruitt to Cal and back. He was calculating. Pruitt walking in here at this hour with a register meant something had broken down in the system he controlled, and Delk was not a man who left system failures unexamined. "Put Mercer in the back," he said to his men without looking at them. "Then wait outside." "Sheriff." The man with the document started. "Outside," Delk said. Flat, final. The man took Cal's arm. Cal went without resistance because resistance would get him hit again, and he was conserving what he had left for a moment that wasn't this one. They put him in the back cell, not the one Walker had mentioned where Briggs slept, but the far cell iron bars, no lock on the inside. The man pulled the cell door shut, and the lock engaged with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Cal sat on the edge of the cot. He had the documents. Then he didn't have the documents. He was in a cell. Delk was in the front room talking to Pruitt, and whatever Pruitt said in the next few minutes was going to determine a great many things. He put his hand in his coat pocket. The small glass bottle was still there. Briggs's coffee had been handled at 9:30 as planned, and Briggs was unconscious in the far corner of the back room, which was why Delk's man had put Cal in this cell instead. Briggs would sleep until morning. He was not a factor. What Cal had in his pocket was not the bottle. It was the folded brown paper with Walker's combination on it, and beneath it, tucked flat against the paper, something he had taken from the safe along with the transfer documents. Something he had not told Evelyn about, because he hadn't been certain it existed until he opened the safe and found it. A second ledger. Not Daniel's. Delk's own. A small, neat accounting of everything Walker had described. The payments, the names, the amounts. But in Delk's handwriting. The private record of a man so certain of his own invulnerability that he had written down his crimes in his own hand and locked them in his own safe. Cal still had it. In the confusion of the man's fist and the documents going sideways, Delk had picked up the transfer papers. He had not seen the second ledger go into Cal's coat. Cal sat in the cell and listened to Delk's voice in the front room low and controlled, and Pruitt's voice higher, less controlled, and thought about what came next. What came next arrived in 11 minutes from a direction none of them had planned for. The back window of the cell block, the one that opened onto the alley on the south side of the building, slid upward from the outside with a sound that was barely a sound at all. Cal turned his head. A hand appeared on the sill, then a forearm. Then Evelyn Harper came through that window sideways, carefully favoring her left side, and landed on the cell block floor without making enough noise to matter, and straightened up and looked at him through the bars. He stared at her. "How?" he said. "Walker told me about the window 6 hours ago," she said quietly. "He said it was the one he always meant to fix, and never did." She was already looking at the cell lock old lever type, the kind that required a key from the outside, but could be manipulated from inside with the right tool, which she apparently had, because she was pulling a thin piece of flat metal from inside her boot. "You can pick a lock," Cal said. "Daniel taught me," she said. "He said a surveyor's wife needed to know how to get in and out of places." She inserted the metal into the lock mechanism. "He was right about that too. You have the ledger. Against my ribs. I also have the index register. Pruitt handed it to me when Delk's man came to the land office door. He just handed it to me and said go out the back, and then he walked out the front." She worked the lock with the focused attention of someone doing a thing they have done before but not recently. "He's in there right now." "I know. He came here." "He walked into the sheriff's office on his own." She paused in her work. "I didn't expect that." "Neither did I." She went back to the lock. Cal watched her hands, which were steady. His jaw was swelling into something unpleasant, and one of his ribs had caught the desk edge at an angle that he was going to be feeling for a week, but he was sitting upright and thinking clearly, which was what mattered. "Delk has the transfer documents," he said. "I know." "Evelyn." "I know," she said again. "But you still have Delk's own ledger, don't you? I watched you put something in your coat before his man grabbed you, something smaller than the transfer papers." He looked at her. You saw that. I was at the land office window, she said. I came back when I heard voices. I watched through the front window for 2 minutes before Pruitt went in. The lock gave with a soft click. She pulled the cell door open. I saw everything. Cal stood. Delk's ledger, she said. His own handwriting, and Daniel's ledger, and the index register that Pruitt just handed me, which contains his own notations about the transfer dates entries he made himself that don't match the falsified public record. She looked at him with the clear, complete focus that Walker had described, and that Cal had now seen in operation for 36 hours. We lost the transfer documents, but what we have is better. He stared at her. Delk's ledger in his own hand, she said. Corroborated by Daniel's field notes, corroborated by Pruitt's own registration entries that he didn't know were going to matter. 3 independent sources, none of which can be explained away as forgeries, because one is Delk's own writing, and one is a dead man's, and one belongs to the man currently sitting in Delk's front room. She paused. Aldridge can file on this tonight. Cal understood in that moment what Daniel Harper had meant when he said she could see the whole shape of a problem from the outside. It wasn't just intelligence. It was a particular kind of clarity, the kind that only came to people who had learned to think inside pressure the way most people breathed inside air. We still need to get out of this building, he said. Walker is in the alley with 2 horses. Of course he is. She handed him something, his gun belt, which one of Delk's men had removed and left on the shelf outside the cell. He buckled it without comment and checked the cylinder out of habit. From the front room, Pruitt's voice rose sharply, then cut off. Then, Delk's voice no longer controlled saying something with a hard edge that carried through the wall without the words being clear. Then a silence that had a particular texture. Cal and Evelyn looked at each other. Cal went first to the back window and looked out. Walker was there, 2 horses standing absolutely still in the alley shadow. Cal dropped through the window and turned to take the register that Evelyn passed through before she came through herself, and he caught her arm as she landed because her ribs were bad and she was not going to say so. She didn't pull away from his hand, which told him how bad the ribs actually were. They moved. Walker had the horses moving before they were fully mounted, and Cal felt the specific focused calm of a man who has been in motion under pressure before and knows how his own body operates in it. The ledger was in his coat. Daniel's ledger was against Evelyn's ribs. The register was in Walker's saddlebag. They cleared the south end of town at a pace that was not a gallop. A gallop in the middle of the night was a signal, but fast enough that by the time Delk came out of his office and found an empty cell and a missing prisoner, they had 4 blocks of dark between themselves and him. Walker said, "Where?" "North Road," Cal said. "Miller's Crossing. Aldridge has a man there." Evelyn said, "You didn't tell me that. I didn't know if we'd need it." He looked at her sideways in the dark. "We need it." They rode. The night was cold and clear in the way of Colorado nights that didn't care about anything happening underneath them, and the horses were good horses. Walker's livery horses well fed and steady, and for 20 minutes the only sounds were hooves on packed dirt and the wind coming off the ridge and the breathing of 3 people who were alive and moving and in possession of enough evidence to end Harmon Delk's reign over Cutter's Bend County. It was Walker who heard it first. "Riders," he said, behind them. Not close yet, a quarter-mile back, maybe more, but moving fast. Not the careful, measured pace of people trying not to be noticed. The hard, deliberate pace of people who had already decided on pursuit. Cal counted hoofbeats without looking. 3, maybe 4. "Delk moves fast," Evelyn said. "Not afraid, just noting it." "He always has," Cal said. "Walker, how far to Miller's Crossing?" 6 miles. 6 miles with a quarter-mile lead and riders behind them who were not carrying cracked ribs and would not be slowing for anything. Cal looked at Evelyn. She was riding straight-backed and without complaint, and her face in the dark was the face of a woman who had decided something a long time ago and was simply executing it. "There's a fork half a mile ahead," Walker said. "Left goes to Miller's Crossing. Right goes back toward town." "Why would we go right?" Evelyn said. "You wouldn't," Cal said. But they'll assume we know this road better than we do, and they'll split at the fork to cover both options." He paused. "Which means at the fork, one or two of them go right. That leaves two, maybe one behind us." "Better odds," Walker said. "Better odds," Cal confirmed. They hit the fork and went left without breaking pace. And behind them, Cal heard the riders reach the fork, and the sound split exactly as he'd calculated, two sets of hooves continuing straight, which was left toward Miller's Crossing, and one set turning right. Two behind them. The horses were still strong. The road was straight. Miller's Crossing was 5 miles, and Cal was doing the arithmetic of distance and pace, and he did not like the numbers. But the numbers were what they were. A shot fired from behind. Not close. A warning or an optimist. The sound of it cracked across the flat dark, and the horses surged without being asked, and Cal felt the movement under him like a held breath finally released. "Hold straight," he said. "Don't look back." Evelyn did not look back. He had not expected her to. The second shot was closer. The man behind them was better than the first shot had suggested, or he was closer than Cal had gauged, or both. The sound of it passed somewhere to the right, and Cal felt Walker's horse drift left involuntarily, the animal's instinct for the sound, and Walker corrected it with quiet hands. "How far?" Evelyn said. 3 miles, Walker said. "Maybe less." Another shot. This one hit the road ahead of them, a freak angle, a ricochet or a long skip, and Evelyn's horse broke stride for half a pace before she steadied it with her knees and her hands, and the kind of horsewomanship that a woman raised in Denver didn't just happen to have, which meant Daniel had taught her that too, or she had taught herself, or she was simply the kind of person who learned fast what she needed to know. Cal dropped back a half length. "What are you doing?" Evelyn said without looking at him. "Keep riding," he said. "Don't stop." "Cal, keep riding." He looked back over his shoulder. Two riders, the closer one maybe 150 yards back, gaining on a straight road with no advantage to work. "Walker, when you see the crossing light, don't slow down until you're past the first building." "Understood," Walker said. Cal turned his horse sideways on the road. The rider behind them was good enough to see the shape of it. A man stopped broadside and he checked his horse, which was the right instinct, because running straight at a stopped gun in the dark was how you got shot. But checking cost him his momentum, and his momentum was all he had. Cal didn't draw. He sat on the stopped horse on the empty road, and he looked at the two riders who had pulled up 100 yards out and in the dark. And the silence, he heard Evelyn's horse and Walker's horse continuing north, the sound of them diminishing the distance between those two, and these two growing with every second he held this road. The closer rider said, "Mercer?" "That's right," Cal said. "Delk says come back quiet, says he'll deal with it quiet." "Delk says a lot of things," Cal said. "He told a widow her husband's claim didn't exist. He told 9 dead men's families the same thing. He told Chester Pruitt that following orders was the same as following the law." He kept his voice conversational, unhurried. "I've found that what Delk says and what Delk does are 2 different things." "You got no play here," the rider said. "Thawed. I've got more play than you think." Cal reached into his coat slowly, clearly, so the rider didn't misread the movement, and held up the small ledger. Even in the dark, even at 100 yards, the rider could see it was something. "What I'm holding right now is Harmon Delk's own record of every payoff he's made in 8 years. Names, amounts, dates. Federal officials. Territorial judges. 2 men in Denver." He let that sit for a moment. "Your name in there." The rider was quiet. "Here's what I know about men who work for Delk," Cal said. "They work for him because he pays, and because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. They're not true believers. They're not loyal." He kept his eyes on the shape of the man in the dark. "So I'm going to ask you once, as one practical man to another, is whatever Delk is paying you worth being named in a federal warrant?" The second rider said something low to the first. Cal couldn't hear the words. He watched the 2 shapes in the dark, and calculated and waited and held the road. The first rider said, We didn't see which way you went at the fork. Cal looked at him for a moment. Much obliged, he said. He turned his horse north and rode. Miller's Crossing was a relay station on the freight route, 3 buildings and a water trough, and a lamp burning in the window of the main building that Cal had been watching for the last mile and a half, the way a man lost in dark water watches a fixed light on shore. Walker and Evelyn were already there. Walker was at the horses. Evelyn was on the porch of the main building, and standing beside her was a man Cal recognized lean 40, with the particular posture of a federal officer who had spent a long time not looking like a federal officer. Aldridge. Not his contact man. Aldridge himself. Cal came off his horse, and the two of them looked at each other across the porch, and Cal held up the 2 ledgers, Delk's and Daniel's, and Aldridge looked at them, and something in his face shifted from the professional neutral he wore like a second skin into something that was briefly simply relief. I moved up my timeline, Aldridge said. When your letter came through, I rode myself. He looked at Evelyn. Mrs. Harper. Marshall, she said. He looked at her the way people looked at her when they had heard about the saloon floor, and were now confronting the fact of her standing upright and functioning with cracked ribs, and the kind of composure that made a room quieter when she walked into it. I'm sorry about your husband. Thank you, she said. I'd prefer to discuss what happens next. Aldridge almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. They went inside. Aldridge had a deputy with him and a portable writing desk that spoke to the kind of preparedness that came from 2 years spent waiting for this exact conversation. Cal laid out both ledgers. Evelyn laid out the index register. Walker sat across the table from Aldridge and began to talk, and his voice was steady, and it did not stop. For 3 hours, the evidence of 8 years of Harmon Delk's operation in Cutter's Bend was laid on a table in a freight relay station and examined by a federal marshal who had been hunting it for 2 of those years. Aldridge read. He asked questions. He read again. He had his deputy copy sections in duplicate. He compared dates across documents with the focused, methodical attention of a man who had spent his career building cases out of scattered fragments and knew what a complete picture looked like when he finally found one. At 2 a.m, he set down the last document. He looked at Cal. He looked at Walker. He looked at Evelyn Harper, who had been sitting straight-backed and clear-eyed for 3 hours with cracked ribs and 48 hours of accumulated danger and no sign on her face of any of it. This is enough, Aldridge said. The words settled into the room like the last note of a long piece of music. Judge Raleigh arrives in Cutter's Bend Thursday morning. Aldridge continued. I'll have the warrant filed before he gets off the stage. He looked at Cal. I need you there. Witness to the evidence acquisition. I'll be there, Cal said. Walker, I'm going to need you in Cutter's Bend for Thursday. Your testimony ties the witness records directly to Delk's notations in this ledger. Can you do that? Walker was quiet for a moment. The quiet of a man thinking about a 12-year-old daughter and a wife who didn't sleep and a livery-stable job and 14 months of shame carefully maintained. I can do that, he said. Aldridge nodded. He looked at Evelyn. Mrs. Harper, the Harper claimed the mine at Cutter's Ridge. Based on what's in that ledger and in the index register, the transfer to Consolidated Western was executed fraudulently, which means it's void. The legal claim reverts to the registered owner's estate. Evelyn said, That's me. That's you, Aldridge said. Thursday in front of Judge Raleigh, I will make that case. But I want to know before we walk into that courtroom. He looked at her directly. Are you prepared for what Delk will do between now and Thursday morning? Because once I file this warrant, he will know. And he will not. Marshall Aldridge, Evelyn said quietly. He stopped. I came to Cutter's Bend alone, she said. I walked into the Rusty Spur Saloon and asked one question, and I was kicked across the floor in front of 30 men who did nothing. She looked at him with those clear, steady eyes. I have been in this town for 2 days. I have been attacked. I have picked a lock, I have climbed through a window, I have ridden 6 miles in the dark, with men shooting at me, and I have cracked ribs from an injury I sustained on my first afternoon. She paused. What exactly is it you think Harmon Delk could do that would be worse than what I have already managed?" Aldridge looked at her for a long moment. "Nothing," he said. "I suppose not." Outside, the Colorado night was going from black toward the particular gray that came before dawn, and somewhere south of them in his fine hotel room, Harmon Delk was sleeping or not sleeping, and calculating or not calculating the distances between himself and what was coming for him. He did not know about the relay station. He did not know about Aldridge. He did not know that his own ledger, his private accounting, written in his own hand, locked in his own safe, was now sitting on a federal marshal's writing desk, being copied in duplicate. He had one more night of not knowing. Thursday was coming, and Evelyn Harper was ready for it. They did not go back to Cutter's Bend that night. Aldridge made the call without discussion. 3 people with evidence in their possession had no business riding back into a town where Harmon Delk was awake and angry and had already demonstrated a willingness to use his authority as a personal weapon. They stayed at Miller's Crossing in the relay station's spare room, and Evelyn slept on a cot that was harder than the bedroll above the feed store and didn't notice the difference because her body had decided that exhaustion outranked discomfort and shut her down completely. She woke before dawn with the ledger still pressed against her ribs and Cal sitting in the chair by the door, awake the same way he had been awake in the chair above the feed store 2 nights ago, which meant he either never slept or slept in increments so small they didn't register as sleep. She sat up carefully. "How's the rib?" he said. "Same as it was," she said. "How long until Raleigh's stage?" "Arrives at 9. He looked at the window where the gray was just beginning to separate itself from the black. "We ride at 7. Aldridge wants us in position before Delk knows we're back." "Delk already knows we're back," she said. "He knew we'd come back. He's not a stupid man." "No," Cal said. "He's not." She stood and poured water from the jug on the shelf and drank. And in the quiet of that room in the last gray minutes before the day committed itself, she said, "Tell me about before. You and Delk. You knew each other." Cal was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. 8 years ago, he said, I was moving money for a land syndicate out of Kansas City. Not stolen claims at that point, it was legitimate brokerage, or close enough that I told myself it was. Delk was doing the same kind of work for a different group. We crossed paths on a deal in the Southern Territory. We sat at the same table for 3 days negotiating boundaries. He turned the tin cup in his hands. I walked away from that deal because something about it felt wrong. I couldn't name what exactly, just the feeling of a man who operates without a floor, no limit to how far down he'll go if the money is right. He looked at the window. Delk didn't walk away, and 6 months later, the first man in his county turned up dead in a ravine. And you knew. I suspected. There's a difference. He set the cup down. I've spent 8 years with that difference. Evelyn looked at him. That's why you're here. Partly. And partly because of Daniel. Daniel wrote to me, Cal said, because he knew I understood what Delk was. He wrote to me because he needed someone who wasn't afraid of that man. He paused. And because he thought I owed a debt I hadn't finished paying. Did you? Cal looked at her directly. Yes, he said. I did. She nodded once slowly. That was all she said about it, which was exactly the right amount, and he knew it. And the room was quiet between them in a way that was not empty but full. The particular fullness of 2 people who have been through something together and are still sitting on the near side of the final part of it. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he said. At 7 o'clock, they rode south, all 5 of them. Evelyn, Cal, Walker, Aldridge, and the deputy, and the sun was a hard cold thing coming up over the ridge to the east. And Cutter's Bend showed itself on the flat below them as a collection of rooftops and smoke ordinary looking, the way corrupt things always looked ordinary from a distance. Aldridge had his warrant papers in the document case on his saddle. He had prepared them at 3 a.m. by lamplight, his deputy copying, while he dictated the language of federal authority, rendered in careful ink on proper forms, that carried the weight of a government that Harmon Delk had been pretending didn't apply to him for 8 years. They rode in on the main street. Not through the alleys. Not careful. Not quiet. not staggered and invisible, the way Cal had been moving through this town for 6 months. Down the center of the main street of Cutter's Bend at 7:15 in the morning, 5 riders and the people on the street watched them come in with the particular attention of a town that had learned to read arrivals carefully. Evelyn rode straight-backed. Her ribs ached with every stride of the horse, and she did not adjust her posture. She looked at the Rusty Spur Saloon as they passed it. The door was closed at this hour. She looked at the land office. She looked at the hotel where Delk slept. She looked at the sheriff's office, and did not look away from it. Aldridge said quietly, "He'll come to us. He'll know what we are before we get to the end of the block." He was right. Delk came out of the hotel before they reached the sheriff's office. He was fully dressed, badge straight hat, on the complete presentation of a county sheriff on a normal Thursday morning, and he stood on the hotel steps and watched 5 riders come down his street, and he showed nothing on his face, because Harmon Delk had spent 8 years becoming a man who showed nothing on his face. They stopped in front of him. Aldridge said, "Sheriff Delk, I'm Federal Marshal George Aldridge out of Denver. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraudulent land transfer, falsification of official county records, bribery of territorial officials, and conspiracy in connection with the deaths of 4 registered land claimants in your county." The street was quiet. Not the quiet of the Rusty Spur Saloon, when Evelyn had asked her question and every man looked at his drink. This was a different quiet. The quiet of people stopping and turning and looking, some of them from doorways, some from the street. A morning's worth of ordinary Cutter's Bend, going still to watch something it had been waiting for without knowing it was waiting. Delk looked at Aldridge. He looked at Walker, and something moved in his face when he saw Walker, not surprise, but a confirmation of a thing he had suspected and not allowed himself to fully believe. He looked at Cal, and between the two of them passed the 8-year acknowledgement of 2 men who had always known it would end in proximity to each other. Then he looked at Evelyn Harper. She looked back at him. She did not look away, and she did not look triumphant, and she did not look afraid. She looked at him the way she had looked at his badge from the floor of the Rusty Spur Saloon, clear-eyed and completely present, and absolutely certain of what she was seeing. "You've got no jurisdiction here," Delk said. His voice was level. "This is a county matter." "Land fraud against federally registered claims is not a county matter," Aldridge said. "You know that. Those documents were obtained illegally. Whatever Mercer took from my office was your own ledger," Aldridge said, "written in your hand, locked in your safe. We also have the index register from your land office voluntarily provided by your own county registrar. And we have the field ledger of Daniel Harper, which you failed to locate despite 6 months of that building being under your authority." Aldridge's voice carried no heat. It was the voice of a man who had the numbers and knew it. "The warrant has been prepared and will be signed by Judge Raleigh when his stage arrives in—" He checked his watch, 1 hour and 40 minutes. Delk stood very still. Behind him, 2 of his men had appeared on the hotel steps. The street had filled without anyone appearing to fill it, people finding reasons to be near windows, near doorways, near anywhere that had a clear sight line to the center of the main street of Cutter's Bend on a Thursday morning in October of 1881. "Crestwalker," Delk said without looking at Walker, "you have a daughter." The words landed in the air like something thrown. Walker's hands on his reins tightened. Evelyn felt rather than saw Cal's response beside her, a subtle shift, a settling the movement of a man moving a fraction closer to a decision. "That's enough," Cal said. Delk's eyes moved to him. "You don't run this street, Mercer." "Not yet," Cal said. "But the man who does is about to stop." "My daughter," Walker said, and his voice did not shake, "knows her father is a man who tried to do right. That's what she knows." He looked at Delk directly, which was something Evelyn suspected he had not done in 14 months. "And she's going to know it fully after today." Something fractured in Delk's composed surface. Not much. A hairline thing. But it was there. He looked at his 2 men on the hotel steps, and they looked at him, and in that look was the information that Delk had built his operation on for 8 years, the information that his men would do what he told them because they always had. But these men had heard Aldridge's words. These men had seen Walker riding in with a federal marshal. These men were doing the arithmetic that Cal had offered to the riders in the dark the night before, calculating what Delk's instructions were worth against the weight of a federal warrant and a judge arriving on a stage in less than 2 hours. One of them looked away first. It was a small thing. It was everything. Delk saw it. And Evelyn watched the moment that Harmon Delk understood that he had spent 8 years building a structure out of fear and money and proximity, and that the structure had just told him in the language of a man looking away that it was not going to hold. He went for his gun. Not at Aldridge. Not at Walker. He went for it the way a cornered man goes for something, not with strategy, but with the last reflex of a man who has always made problems disappear and could not process the reality of a problem that would not. Cal was faster. Not drawing, he didn't draw. He put his horse forward one hard step, and the animal's weight came between Delk's hand and its target, and Delk's gun cleared the holster and went sideways, and Cal came off the horse in the same motion, and his hand closed on Delk's wrist, and he held it, just held it, with the calm and total physical certainty of a man who had been waiting for this exact moment for 6 months and had thought carefully about how it would go. Delk fought it for 3 seconds. Then he stopped. Cal took the gun. He stepped back. He handed it to Aldridge without looking at it, and Aldridge took it and holstered it and produced a set of iron manacles that he locked onto Harmon Delk's wrists in the middle of the main street of Cutter's Bend, while every person in that town watched and said nothing and breathed. "Harmon Delk," Aldridge said, "you are under federal arrest." The words fell into the quiet of the street and kept falling the way words do when they've been needed for a very long time. Evelyn sat on her horse and watched it happen. She did not feel what she had expected to feel. She had thought in the long, dark months after Daniel's funeral, in the nights when she had lain awake building this moment in her mind, that when it came, it would feel like fire. Like the release of something that had been compressed for so long, it had become part of her structure. It did not feel like fire. It felt like a door opening into a room that had been locked for a year, and the room was empty and quiet and full of ordinary daylight, and it was exactly the right size for one person to stand in and breathe. She dismounted. Her ribs screamed at the movement. She landed on the street of Cutter's Bend on both feet and stood upright, and around her, the town was beginning to make sound again. Voices, footsteps, the ordinary noise of a place remembering how to be ordinary. And she watched Aldridge's deputy take Delk's arm and walk him toward the sheriff's building that had been Delk's domain and was now the first room of his federal custody. Cal came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything. He stood close enough that she could have reached out and touched his arm, and she didn't, and he didn't. And they stood together in the street and watched Harmon Delk walk through a door that was closing behind him and would not open again the way it had before. "Walker," she said. Walker was still on his horse. He was looking at the door that Delk had gone through, and his face was doing something complicated that it had probably been saving up for 14 months. "You did it," she said. He looked at her. "You did it," she said again. "You held it together long enough for it to matter. That's not a small thing." Walker looked at his hands on the reins. "I should have moved sooner." "Maybe," she said. "But you moved when it counted." She looked at him steadily. "Go get your family." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned his horse and rode south, and she watched him go, and thought about all the shapes that courage came in, and how rarely any of them looked the way you expected. Judge Harrison Raleigh arrived on the 9:15 stage, which was running 12 minutes late, and the first thing he saw when he stepped onto the main street of Cutter's Bend was a federal marshal waiting for him with a document case, and the particular expression of a man who had done his work and was ready for the court to do its part. The hearing was held in the largest room in the hotel because there was no courthouse in Cutter's Bend. Delk had seen no need for one. Raleigh sat behind a table and read everything that Aldridge placed in front of him with the methodical thoroughness of a man who had been riding the territorial circuit for 22 years and had developed an immunity to being surprised. He asked questions. He asked them in the quiet, focused way of a man interested only in what the evidence showed, not in the drama of the showing. Chester Pruitt testified. He sat across from Judge Raleigh and looked at his hands, and then looked up and described in the careful procedural language of a county registrar the mechanism by which Daniel Harper's claim had been transferred from its legal owner to Consolidated Western Mining Company. He described the date discrepancies he had noted in the register entries, the entries that didn't match the falsified public record because he had made them before Delk told him what they were supposed to say, and he had not gone back to change them because he paused here, and his voice went quiet, because he had thought someday that oversight might matter. It had mattered. Raleigh listened without expression and wrote notes in a small book. Crest Walker testified in the afternoon after riding back from the South Road with his wife beside him, a small, dark-haired woman with the look of someone who had been holding a breath for more than a year and was only now beginning to let it go. Walker sat at that table and named every name and every amount from Delk's private ledger, confirming the entries from his own first-hand knowledge, and his voice was steady all the way through and only wavered once at the moment when he described what he had seen on the ridge north of town on the day that Daniel Harper had not come home. Evelyn sat in the back of the room during Walker's testimony. She sat very still and listened to a man describe the last hours of her husband's life with the plain factual delivery of someone who had been carrying the truth of it alone for a long time and was finally setting it down. She listened to every word. She did not look away. She owed Daniel that to hear it fully, without looking away, because he had faced it fully, and without looking away, and the least she could do for him was be a woman who matched him in that. When Walker finished, she looked at the ceiling for a moment. Just a moment. Then she looked back at the room. Cal was standing against the far wall. He was watching her, not Walker, and when she met his eyes, he didn't look away either, because he was not a man who looked away from things. And she had understood that about him from the first moment she had seen him leaning against the alley wall, asking if she was planning on leaving. She had not been planning on leaving. She was still not planning on leaving. Raleigh called her last. She sat down across from him, and he looked at her, at the woman who had been in his territory for 3 days and had arrived at his table via a saloon floor, 2 nights of dangerous operations, 6 miles on horseback in the dark, with men firing behind her, and a window climb that her ribs had not forgiven, and he said without preamble, "Mrs. Harper, walk me through the original filing." She walked him through it. She had the documents, she had the claim number, the survey coordinates, the filing date, the registration confirmation that Daniel had sent her in the letter she had opened too late. She laid each piece on the table as she spoke, and she explained in the clear, precise language she had always used for things that mattered exactly what had been filed, exactly what had been stolen, and exactly what the evidence now before the court demonstrated about the legal status of the Harper mining claim on the ridge north of town. Raleigh listened. He read. He looked at the index register entries that Pruitt had confirmed. He looked at Delk's ledger, with the Harper name near the bottom and the transfer amount written in Delk's own hand. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "is there anything else you'd like to say before I rule?" She thought about it for a moment. She thought about what she had come here to do, and what it had cost, and what it had taken, and what she had found along the way that she hadn't expected to find. "No, sir," she said. "I think the record speaks clearly enough." Raleigh looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't entirely read, but that felt in some part of it like respect. "It does," he said. He ruled. He ruled that the transfer of the Harper mining claim to Consolidated Western Mining Company was executed fraudulently and was therefore void under territorial law. He ruled that the claim reverted in full to the estate of Daniel Eugene Harper. He ruled that Evelyn Ruth Harper, as sole heir to that estate, was the legal owner of the silver mine on the North Ridge of Cutter's Bend County, effective immediately. He ruled that Harmon Delk would be remanded to federal custody pending trial on all charges. He ruled that Chester Pruitt would face a separate administrative hearing regarding his conduct as county registrar, with Aldridge's recommendation for leniency taken under consideration given his cooperation. He ruled that the county of Cutter's Bend would operate under federal administrative oversight until a legitimate sheriff could be appointed. Each ruling landed in the room like a stone, finding its final resting place after a very long fall. When it was over, Raleigh closed his notebook, stood, and walked out without ceremony, because judges on the territorial circuit had learned that ceremony was a thing that other places could afford. The room emptied around Evelyn slowly. She sat at the table alone for a moment. The documents in front of her. Daniel's claim, filing the transfer records, the index entries, all of it, and she put her hand flat on top of them and felt the paper under her palm. He had filed these carefully. He had kept his notes carefully. He had trusted that the system would work the way it was supposed to work. And when he realized it wouldn't, he had reached out to the only person he could think of who understood what they were dealing with and wasn't afraid of it. And he had trusted that eventually the evidence would find its way to someone who could use it. He had been right. He had been right about the evidence, and he had been right about Cal, and he had been right about her. She picked up the documents and squared them and put them in her satchel, and she stood up, and her ribs made their position on the matter known, and she stood up anyway. Cal was waiting on the hotel porch. He was leaning against the rail with his arms crossed, the same posture as the alley wall 3 days ago, and when she came out, he looked at her face and read whatever was on it without asking her to name it. "How are the ribs?" he said. "Same as they were." "You need a doctor." "I know." She stopped beside him on the porch and looked at the main street of Cutter's Bend, which was going about its Thursday afternoon, with the particular self-conscious ordinariness of a town that has just watched its center of gravity get removed and is not quite sure yet how to stand without it. "I'm going to need a mining engineer," she said. Cal turned his head to look at her. "To assess the claim," she said. "The silver deposit on the North Ridge. I need to know what it's actually worth, what it would take to develop it, whether to develop it myself or find a legitimate buyer." She looked at the ridge on the horizon, which was the same ridge it had always been, and was now a different thing in her life. Daniel assessed it as significant. He was good at his work. "But I need an independent evaluation." "I know an engineer," Cal said. "Out of Colorado Springs. Honest man." "Of course you do." She almost smiled. "I'm also going to need an attorney to formalize the estate transfer and protect the claim going forward." "Denver," Cal said. "I know one there too. You know everyone useful in 3 territories." "It's been a long, varied life," he said. She looked at the ridge for another moment. Then she said, "What do you do now, after this?" He was quiet. "The thing you came here to do is done," she said. "The debt you said you owed, it's paid. Daniel's case is made. Delk is in custody." She turned to look at him. "What comes next for Cal Mercer?" He looked at her with the expression she had come to understand was him thinking about what he actually wanted to say versus what was the safe, careful answer. "That depends," he said. "On what?" "On whether a woman who just became the legal owner of a silver mine in Cutter's Bend County has any use for a man who knows the territory and is reasonably good at staying alive in difficult situations." The afternoon light was going gold over the ridge to the west, the particular end-of-day light of the high Colorado country that made everything look like it had been clarified, stripped down to its essential color. Evelyn Harper stood on the porch of a hotel in a town that had tried to destroy her and had failed, and she looked at Cal Mercer, who had put himself between her and a gun the night before without being asked, and who had sat in chairs through 2 nights watching a door, and who had known her husband, and carried his trust for 6 months in a town where trust was a dangerous thing to carry. She thought about the shape of what came next. The mine, the legal work, the long process of converting a stolen thing back into a real one. The work of building something out of what Daniel had left behind, which was not what she had expected to inherit, but was what she had, and she had never been a woman who refused what she had in favor of what she wished she'd been given. "I might have use for that," she said, temporarily. The corner of his mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile and was more than neutral. "Temporarily." "We'll see," she said. He nodded once, the way he acknowledged everything seriously without performance. They stood on the porch in the last of the afternoon light, and below them, the town of Cutter's Bend continued its recalibration. And somewhere in the sheriff's building, that was no longer Harmon Delk's kingdom. a man who had put his boot into a widow's ribs and called it authority, was beginning to understand the precise distance between what he had been and what he was going to be. And on the North Ridge, the silver was still there exactly where Daniel Harper had found it, and documented it and trusted that the truth of its location would outlast the lie of its transfer. It had waited. It would wait a little longer until the right people arrived to do the work correctly. Evelyn Harper had ridden into Cutter's Bend alone with 3 days of money and a dead husband's claim, and a grief she'd turned into something with edges. She had been kicked to the floor of a saloon, and she had gotten up, and she had kept going, and she had not stopped until the last door opened, and the last ruling was spoken. And the land that belonged to her was declared to be hers by a judge who had read the evidence and found it sufficient. She was still standing. She had always intended to be. The silver mine was hers. The truth was on record. Harmon Delk was in chains. And Daniel Harper, who had measured the ridge carefully and documented every finding and trusted that precision and honesty were things that mattered even in a world that tried to pretend they didn't, had been proven right in every particular. Evelyn picked up her satchel. She straightened the strap on her shoulder. She looked one more time at the ridge on the horizon. Then she walked down the steps and into what came next, and she did not look back at the floor of the Rusty Spur Saloon, or at the shape of what had been done to her, or at the woman she had been when she stepped off the stage 3 days ago with 3 days of money and nothing else. That woman had done her work. What remained was the owner of a silver mine, walking forward on her own 2 feet in the town that had tried to take everything from her and had ended up giving her exactly what she came for. Justice was not given to Evelyn Harper. She went and got it herself.